Genesis 37 is where we're going to be at today. If you're new here, my name's Brett. I'm one of the pastors. I get to do most of the preaching, so we're pumped about that. It's kind of funny Sundays like this to where we know hardly anyone's going to come, but we still gather for worship because we say, hey, if 5 people are here, that's cool. We're gathering to worship Jesus and to dig into the Word. So from other churches, people, welcome. Glad you guys are here. You're always welcome at anything that we do, Ekklesia. Basically, what we do on Sundays is we typically just walk through books of the Bible. So our preaching is always focused on a biblical text, and usually we're just walking through books. So where we're at today is our 9th week in the book of Genesis, and we'll be in Genesis chapter 37. So if you brought a Bible, crack it open. If you didn't bring one, there's one under your seat, or you got it on your phone. However you want to read the Word, get there. And this is about Joseph. You guys have heard of Joseph, right? Got a coat of many colors. Most of us grew up in church, so we know something about the story of Joseph. But I think if we really look at this text and we really dig deep into what's going on, I think if we see these things, we take them into our heart, and we really just wrestle with these truths that are revealed in the story of Joseph, we will be radically changed. I mean, on a very deep, deep level, you'll be freed of fear. You will be sure in the goodness and the grace and the sovereignty of God. And I pray that as we dig into this, burdens would come off of your shoulders and your heart would be set free from different ways and different doubts and different fears that we struggle with, honestly, I think every day. So this is not a trivial text in any way. These are very, very, very deep things going on. So we're basically going to go through the whole story of Joseph. We're going to end with, Genesis 50. I'm not going to read all of it. We're going to key in on Genesis chapter 37, verses 1 through 28. So I'm going to read that. That's really the beginning of the story. But the story of Joseph and keying in on him, it's really the last part of the book of Genesis. Joseph is introduced around chapter 37, and then all the way to chapter 50 of Genesis. That's like the end of Joseph's story. So this is the last big character in the book of Genesis. So first book of the Bible, all of these foundational things. And really what we've seen in the whole book of Genesis is we haven't seen heroes, honestly. We haven't seen one person that we go, man, that was a great man or great woman of God that we are to imitate and emulate and be like them. And that's the point. No. If you really look at every single person in Genesis, they are monumental failures and wicked sinners. Every one of them. And then God shows them grace. And He changes their course. God comes to them in their sin, in their selfishness, in their rebellion. He comes and shows them grace, delivers them, and sets them on a new path to bring Him glory and to bring them joy. So what we've seen is that God has been acting from the beginning as an extravagant giver of grace. And we're going to continue seeing that here in the story of Joseph. So if you got a Bible, grab it open. Genesis 37, we're going to go verses 1 through, 28. Here's the word of God. Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report to them to their father. Now Israel, that's Jacob. Jacob's the same person as Israel. God changed his name from Jacob to Israel. So just track with that as we read through it. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons, because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a robe of many colors. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream that I've dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright, and behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us? Or are you indeed to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Behold, I've dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." And he said to him, "Here I am." So he said to him, "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron and came to Shechem. And a man found him wandering in the fields, and the man asked him, "What are you seeking?" "I'm seeking my brothers," he said. "Tell me, please, where they are pasturing the flock." And the man said, "They have gone away, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come, now, let us just kill him and throw him into one of these pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams." But when Reuben heard it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood. Cast him into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors that he wore, and they took him and cast him into a pit. The pit was empty, and there was no water in it. The word pit can be translated well, so it's an empty well. Then they sat down to eat. And looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, with their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh, on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers listened to him. Then Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. That's the word of the Lord. So I want to point you to three basic things as we walk through this passage. I like to give you an outline of where I'm going so you know what's going on. I think if we really examine what's going on here, we see, first of all, we see the subtleness of sin. We see that sin is very subtle. Or perhaps another way to say it is sin is very hidden. It's deep. It's not on the flesh. The second thing that we see is the secrecy of sovereignty. We see sovereignty clearly in this story, but we see just how secret it truly is. And then lastly, we see the sweetness of salvation. So, the subtleness of sin, the secrecy of sovereignty, and the sweetness of salvation. Ready? All right, number one. We see the subtleness of sin. What do I mean sin is subtle? Just track with that. Think about it, that it's hidden. Maybe that's another way to say it. Sin is more like cancer than a gunshot wound. Sin is more like cancer than a gunshot wound. Do you get that? Like if somebody shoots you with a gun, do you know? Right away, right? No one's going to go, "I've been shot. I got shot yesterday and I didn't know it," right? You know if you've been shot, and you immediately seek medical attention because you realize how grave the situation is. But it's not that way with cancer. Some of you have had cancer. Some of you have had loved ones die from cancer. Some of you have known people that have had cancer for a long time and they didn't know it. And when they finally found out that they had cancer, it was too late. You see, sin is like that. Sin is not like a gunshot wound that we sin or we're tempted and we fall in, and immediately every time we just go, "Yep, I know." A lot of times sin is so subtle, it's like that person that gets cancer, but they don't even know they've got it. We've got to realize that. We've got to see this, and you see this even in the story. You see this with Jacob, you see this with Joseph, and you see this with the brothers, that their sin is so subtle like cancer, they don't realize what's going on. But it's almost like it's a volcano, and you don't know what's happening, and then all of a sudden everything inside bursts, and their family is ripped apart. So check out just what's going on with Jacob. Jacob's the dad. He's also called Israel. It says Jacob loved Joseph more than his other brothers. So if you remember last week, Jacob really loved this girl named Rachel. He worked 7 years for her as kind of the bride price. And then the dad said, nope, not giving you Rachel. I'm giving you the other sister. And he's like, what the heck? And so then he goes, all right, I'll work another 7 years for Rachel. So he works another 7 years. And then the father does give him Rachel. He marries Rachel. The Bible literally says she has a good figure. And she's got a nice face and a good figure. That's the Hebrew. I'm not exaggerating. And then the other girl that he also had to marry, he was kind of tricked into it. It says that she had weak eyes. We don't know what that means. She could have been cross-eyed. She could have, we don't know. Lazy eye, we don't know. But it was clear that Rebecca was attractive to the eyes and, And so what's going on here with Jacob is that his wife that he loves more than, he's obviously got a few other wives, right? You even see this in the text. He's got more than one. But the wife that he loves, this was the eldest son of this wife. He had all these other sons with his other wives. Yeah, the Bible's not condoning this going on. The Bible condones monogamy for sure, but polygamy, every time polygamy happens, it never turns out well. Some people look at the stories in the Old Testament and be like, look, they've got all these wives. The Bible says that's cool. It's like, just read the stories. It does not go well having more than one wife. But, so what's going on is Joseph is his father's favorite son because he was old when he had him, and he was the eldest of his favorite wife. So it says that he loved Joseph more than the other brothers. See, Jacob, if you remember, he never got the love, the acceptance, the worth, the attaboy. He never got his father being proud of him. We saw that last week. That Isaac didn't really like Jacob that much. And so Jacob tricked him into giving him the blessing, and he stole it from his brother. And so then he goes off and he's always searching. He's got some daddy issues, right? His dad didn't really love him. And so then Jacob has a kid. He has many kids, and he focuses in on this one that was born of his favorite wife, and he spoils him to death. We see that it was very clear that Jacob loved Joseph more than the other brothers. The brothers knew this, and they said they hated him. I mean, can you imagine if you've got parents, if you've got, let's say, 15 kids, and you spend a ton of money, like on a coat or on an outfit or something, and just bring all the family together and give it to one of your kids. It's like, I spent $3,000 on this outfit or whatever it is, and you just give it to this one kid and just stare at them. Can you imagine what that would do to all of the other kids that you've got? You know that would destroy them. And you know that would breed hatred. It would breed jealousy. It would confuse them. My dad doesn't love me like he loves this other sibling. That's exactly what's going on here with Jacob and Joseph and the other brothers. Do you think Jacob knew this? Do you think he knew this was a big problem? This was sinful, and this is going to well up, and this is going to cause these other brothers to want to kill Joseph? No. It's because sin is so subtle, we convince ourselves of things like Jacob's probably convincing himself that, I never got the love from my dad, and so I'm really going to hone in on this one, Joseph, who's the firstborn of my favorite wife, and I'm going to just shower him with love and blessings. And he probably thought, I'm just being a good dad to Joseph. Yeah, I don't have as much time for the other kids, but he just justified it, I'm sure, and thinks, I'm doing what's right. But what you see in the story is that this breeds hatred. This breeds jealousy. And you see next what it even does to Joseph. Joseph, just check him out. His father loved him. He knew it. Dad comes and gives him a robe of many colors. The Hebrew is really, we translate it robe of many colors. Really, the best translation is it was a really rich robe. Some of the translations say it was a robe with long sleeves. But however you translate it, what's being communicated by Moses, who's writing this, is that the robe cost a lot of money and it was extravagant. So it may have had many colors, may have long sleeves. I don't know, maybe long sleeve coats were really cool back then and no one else had them. But he gives this gift to Joseph, and you know Joseph's wearing it around like, what's up? Dad loves me more than you guys. And what does this do in Joseph? Look what else he does too. What is his father's love and spoiling him? It spoils him rotten. He's got this coat. Dad loves me more. The dude has a dream that his brothers are one day going to bow down to him, and he just goes and tells them, hey, check out this dream I had. You're going to bow down to me. And then they got mad at him, and then he has another dream that seemed to say that his father and mother and brothers are going to bow down to him, and he goes, hey, check this out. I had another dream. It's like, so Joseph's a tool. Joseph, everything that he had, he received by grace. Everything. The fact that he was the firstborn son of his dad's favorite wife, did he choose that? Did he do that? No. It was grace, and so his dad loves him more. The coat of many colors, or the coat of long sleeves, was that anything Joseph did? No, that was grace. The fact that he had these dreams and that God is communicating to them that someday these people are going to bow down to you, you're going to rule and reign over them. That was grace. Everything that had happened in Joseph's life, everything that he had was grace, but his is the sin of pride because he thinks that it's not really grace, it's I'm awesome. I'm in this position because I'm better than them. And then you see him going and telling them all this stuff. How many of you would want to throw your brother in a pit if he comes to you and say, hey, you're going to bow down to me and I'm going to rule over you. Check out my coat. We all want to do that. So Joseph's a big tool. His is the sign, or his is the sin of pride, but he just thinks he's keeping it real. It's like, my dad loves me more than you. I've got this coat. I'm having these dreams. Let me tell you all about it. If someone would say, man, Joseph, pride. He obviously sees that his brothers are ticked off at him, but he doesn't change. He goes and tells them the other dream. I think he thinks he's keeping it real and just being like, what? I am awesome. Instead of being humbled by the fact that everything he'd received was grace from God. His was the sin of pride. And then we even see the sin of the brothers. They hated Joseph. The Hebrew narrative, like Hebrew writing, is very spare. Details aren't put in unless you really need to know them. And if you notice through this section, it says Moses writes 4 times that the brothers hated Joseph. That's the writer saying, realize what's going on. I want to draw your attention to this. I'm going to keep repeating it so you realize they hated him. So the brothers, their younger brother, really prideful, kind of a tool, but they responded sinfully as well. It says they were jealous of him. They were enraged. They hated him. Is that the way that they should have responded? Well, no. We have tons of people like that in our life that was like, God, prideful. I think we're tempted to do the same thing that the brothers did. But I think they're thinking, we're going to treat him bad. Look at him. Look what he's saying to us. He's coming up to us, big bad brothers, and saying, you're going to worship me. We're like, oh, okay. As they say, let's see him coming. Let's throw him in a pit. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams. We'll see what happens to his dreams then. And so theirs is the sin of jealousy. Their dad loved him more than them, and that stinks. He was pretentious. He was prideful. Joseph was a tool, but they responded. They jumped to the conclusion of, let's kill him. I understand, like, locking him in a closet for a bit to, kind of show him his place, but they wanted to kill him. And they're in this far land. They're like, no, let's not kill him. Let's just throw him in this deep well. Because we don't want to have that blood on our hands. We just want to keep him away and teach him a big lesson. I would say they probably went too far, right? They end up selling him into slavery because the sin of jealousy, it was so subtle because they were thinking, he's a jerk. He needs to learn his lesson. Joseph's sin of pride, I think, was so subtle in him because he just thinks, I'm awesome. Look at all this stuff I've got. And the father, Jacob's sin of showing preference, he's just like, I just want to love him. I just want to love him well. I think what we see from this part of the story is that sin is so subtle that we desperately need to be in the Word, and we need to have Christian friendships and people that know, look into my life. I want you to talk to me if you see something going on that seems out of whack. Because we have this, what we'll call an inner lawyer. We could be in sin, but we so easily justify it. We're arguing in ourselves. It's like you got this lawyer that's saying, no, that's not sin. Jacob's saying, no, it's not sin to show preference to Joseph. I'm just loving him. Joseph's saying, no, it's not sin. It's not prideful. I'm just keeping it real. The brothers are just saying, look how awful our brother is. We're just trying to teach him a lesson. I think we've all got this inner lawyer going on, and we've got this cancer growing. And when you get this sense that something's wrong, you get this sense that something destructive is going on, or someone that you love, someone that you know, is trying to help you see a destructive pattern in your life, and you simply justify it in your mind, like we do every day, like Jacob, Joseph, and the brothers are doing. When we do that, it's like someone telling you you've got cancer, and you say, no, I don't think so. Or it's really not that bad. That's the equivalent, that when the Holy Spirit brings something to us and we go, this is off. I need to repent. This is sin. Or when the Holy Spirit uses one of our friends to say, you need to look at this, man. And we just simply justify our actions. It's like someone with cancer saying, it's not that big of a deal. Or, no, I don't think I do. We need to be so careful to just quickly say, no, you don't understand. Or, no, I had all these good motives in doing this. We've got to be humble enough to realize that sin is like cancer rather than a gunshot wound. That it's so destructive and it's so subtle, but it can blow the top off. Just like we see with these people. So what does this mean for us? A few things. Number one, the most destructive things you can do to your children are going to be things that it seems like you're doing for your children. I'll say that again. The most destructive things you can do to your children may seem like things that you're doing for them. Does any parent who spoils their kid, I'm not talking about you, look at other people. I know it's tough. As we go, I don't spoil my kid. No one thinks they spoil their kid. But look at people who you know spoil their kid. Are they thinking that, I'm doing something bad to my kid? Or are they thinking, I'm just giving them everything they want. I don't want to say no to them. I want them to be happy. No, they're thinking they're doing something great for them. They're controlling their situation or doing something that they think is good, but it could be extremely destructive because they're not thinking clearly, just like Jacob. So we as parents, we've got to know that just because we think it's a good thing to do, it might not be good. It might actually be destructive. Second thing that we see in this part of the story is that the most destructive things in your life are probably the things that you don't think are that big of a deal. The most destructive things in your life are probably the things that you shrug off and think, that's not that big of a deal. This person's overreacting. Or, surely that wasn't the Holy Spirit. You've got to realize it's so subtle and it's like cancer, and that you need to look into the mirror of the Word to reveal what's really going on. You need to stay sensitive to the Holy Spirit and pray big prayers like, convict me. Expose in me the things that are off track, the things that I have no idea that I'm doing, but that are actually the cancers of sin in my heart. Number 3, I think we see that we are in far more need of grace than we realize. If sin is really that subtle, if the most destructive things in our life are probably the things we don't think are that big of a deal, so we're not really taking them seriously, we're in a far bigger need of grace than we could ever realize, because we're honestly more messed up than we're willing to admit. And just like this story, just like the story's unfolding, this family is in far more need of grace than they have any idea. They think everything's okay. Jacob thinks he's loving him. Joseph thinks he's keeping it real. The brothers think they're just giving him what he deserves. But it's about to destroy the family. Our sin's not a gunshot wound. It's like cancer. Please dwell on that and think about that. That's the subtleness of sin. The second thing we see in this story is the secrecy of sovereignty. What do we mean when we say sovereignty or sovereign? The Bible teaches through and through that God is sovereign. So for example, verses like 1 Timothy 6, 15 and 16 says, He, that is God, is the blessed and only sovereign, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, who alone has immortality. Right? Paul's like driving it home to Timothy. He is the blessed and only sovereign. The simplest way you can explain what sovereign means, or that God is sovereign means that God has ultimate ability and ultimate authority. So he has ultimate ability. He can do whatever he wants to do. He's not restricted in any way. And he has the ultimate authority to do that, to use his ultimate ability in any way that he wants to. So sovereignty, ultimate ability, coupled with ultimate authority every second of every day since the history of everything. That's what it means that God is sovereign. Hebrews says that Jesus upholds the universe by the word of his power. If you just sit on that verse for a second, you'll notice what the writer's saying. He's not saying that Jesus created everything and then kind of stepped back and it's all just running and working. The writer of Hebrews is saying that he upholds the universe by the word of his power to help us understand that God is so sovereign that he is at all times, by his sovereignty, holding together all things. He's not passive in the oxygen levels of our world. He's not passive on the weather. He's not passive on anything, but he is ultimate authority and he has ultimate ability. So when we first hear, I think, God is sovereign, maybe some of you were hearing, all right, God is sovereign, and we think, well, that means awesome. God is sovereign, knows everything, has all the authority, has all the ability. I know God through Jesus. So that means I'm going to figure out everything that's going on, and I'm going to finally know what's going on in my life because God is sovereign and I know him. How many of you know that's not true? It's like God's sovereignty, he doesn't work like that. He knows everything. He's in control of everything. But honestly, we don't see God's sovereign working usually until he's already done something. Think of it like you're driving a car. And we know God is sovereign and we know everything out in front of us. God is ultimately in control of everything. And so we're looking out the front windshield and we're driving and we're trying to look for the sovereign plan of God. And the truth is, we don't ever see it in the front windshield. If we do see it in this life, it's in the rear view mirror. Sometimes we're not going to see certain things until we're with Jesus face to face. He makes all things new and he tells us, this is why these things happened. This is what's going on. We don't see the sovereignty of God out the windshield. We see it, if we see it in this life, we see it in the rear view mirror going, oh. How many of you have had moments like that in your life? You're going through something crazy. Looking out the front window, you're just like, God, what are you doing? And then in the rear view mirror, you go, oh, again, okay. Again, you did that. I doubt you. I freak out. And then I realize you're actually in control and you had something very clearly going on. That's what it means that God is sovereign. And then we have verses like this in Romans 8:28. It says, God makes all things work together for good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. That's a big verse. That verse gets thrown around a lot, but this verse is speaking of the fact that Jesus upholds everything by the word of his power. And so what God is saying to us is that in his infinite sovereignty, he's working in and through everything and everyone for the joy of his people and for his glory. The fact that God is sovereign and God is gracious, that's coupled together. It says, for those who love him and are called according to his purpose, God's saying, I'm working in and through every situation at every time, everywhere, for your joy and for my glory. But why doesn't he just tell us what's going on? I mean, we want to know, right? We're going through something, looking out the front window. It's like, God, I don't know what you're doing. I'm doubting again. I'm freaking out again. Why doesn't he show us the map, as it were? I don't know. That's the simplest answer. I don't know. But I do know two things. I know that God's thoughts and God's ways are so much higher than our ways. That's what Isaiah, I believe it's 55, says. My thoughts are not your thoughts. My ways are not your ways. As far as the heavens are above the earth, are my thoughts higher than your thoughts, and my ways higher than your ways? So I know that, and I think with that in mind, for God to try to explain to us what he's doing and what's coming, it would be like a grown mother trying to explain to her 1-year-old what it's going to take for her to graduate college. Moms, you going to be able to explain that to your 1-year-old? I mean, they're saying like one word. No, we realize like there's some things that people at a certain level aren't going to be able to get. And I mean, that's a poor analogy because God's not just as smart, like smarter than us or wiser than us as if a 1-year-old to a 30-year-old. It's far more than that. But it helps us grab the idea that his ways are so much higher that we wouldn't even be able to get it. Number 2, why doesn't he tell us what's going on? He wants us to trust him. He wants us to trust him. He wants us to know and look at him, who he is and what he's done and how he's revealed himself. And he wants us to say, I don't know what's going on. I can't see it out the front window. But you've promised and you've proven yourself. So I trust you. It's hard. We cry out like the man in the gospel accounts that says, I believe, help my unbelief. Let me tell you something. Jesus is never hard on anyone that's struggling to believe. Never. Jesus is only hard on people in the Gospels who are refusing to believe. I don't want to believe. But those who come to him like the man, Jesus said, I'm going to heal your son. Do you believe? He said, I believe. Help my unbelief. Jesus doesn't speak harshly. But those who are struggling to believe and doubting and wanting to trust him and crying out, I believe, help my unbelief, Jesus gives grace. You need to know that he wants us to trust him. And so that's what we're speaking about when we speak about sovereignty. Let me give you a little illustration of kind of how we see this. There's this great part in J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. If you haven't watched the movies or read the books, shame on you. Just kidding. But awesome stories. So if you have seen it, you'll track with it. If not, I'm sorry. There's this great scene to where this guy named Gandalf, who's this wizard, and he's the leader of this company that's out on this epic mission to go destroy evil forever. Gandalf is leading them, and then they come to this one spot against this huge enemy. Everyone crosses this bridge, and then Gandalf goes out and he stands in the middle of this bridge, and it's a chasm beneath him. He stands there and won't let the evil cross, and they've still got a long way to go to destroy evil forever. Gandalf stands there and says, you shall not pass, right? You know what I'm talking about if you've seen it. It's epic. He says, you shall not pass. And he says all this epic stuff that I'm not going to try to recreate. And then the bridge falls down. The evil guy falls down in the pit. And then he whips up his tail or a whip and catches Gandalf's foot, pulls him off. Gandalf's hanging there and all of his company are looking at him like, our leader. And then he just says, fly, you fools. And he falls. And if you've seen it, you know like the terror and the horror. It's like our fearless, powerful leader just fell into utter darkness, just fell into the pit. He's gone. He's abandoned. He's dead. If you watch the rest of the story, he actually comes back from death to life. He comes back and he's more wise, he's more powerful, he's stronger, and he actually ends up leading the company to be able to destroy evil forever. But at the time when he falls into that chasm, you go, all right, Gandalf's gone, we're hopeless. But through the sovereign working plan of this story, he comes back and they defeat evil forever. You know, the same thing happened to Joseph. Joseph was put in a pit of darkness. Joseph left his father's home. He went to a distant land called Dothan. Do you ever wonder why? Like you look in the story and there's so many details. And a lot of times we look at the details of stories and we're like, golly, I guess they just wanted us to know every single thing that's going on. But we're told he went to this place called Shechem. They weren't there. And then he ended up going to this place called Dothan. So he goes to Dothan, and his brothers received him not. He was stripped of his robe. That was the symbol of his father's love for him. His father gave him this gift. This is how a very physical reminder that Joseph's dad loved him. He was stripped of that. He was cast into a pit and abandoned to death. And he's crying out from the pit. That word in verse 24 that says he was cast into a pit, that word is the word that's used throughout the Old Testament, talking about casting a dead body into a grave. It's a serious word. They're throwing Joseph's body into a pit as though they would throw a dead body into a grave. He was abandoned to death. He was betrayed by his own. He was sold into slavery for pieces of silver. Can you imagine what's going on in his head? I imagine he wishes he wasn't such a tool and arrogant. But his own brothers, his own flesh and blood, throw him in a pit, abandon him, and then they figure out we can just get rid of him without having his blood on our hands. We'll just sell him. We'll make him a slave the rest of his life. Sold him into slavery. He was falsely accused for sins that he never committed. He gets sold into slavery. He ends up going to this guy named Potiphar, and he becomes kind of the second in charge for this guy named Potiphar. He's one of his servants. Potiphar's wife likes the way Joseph looks, tries to come on to him. Joseph says no. Says, I'm not going to sleep with you. Happens another time, he says no. She grabs him, and it says that he runs away naked. I guess he had a robe on, and she grabbed it, wouldn't let him go, and he flees. He ran, flee from sexual immorality. That dude did. He ran away naked. So he runs away, and then Potiphar's wife comes to Potiphar and says, Jacob tried to rape me. So Potiphar throws him in prison. And all this stuff, Jacob's life seemed great. He has his father's love, everything. Then he's thrown into a pit. He's sold into slavery. His own people, his own brothers rejected him. And then he's falsely accused and falsely has to pay the punishment for crimes and sins he never committed. But here's the thing about this story. If Jacob didn't go through every single one of those things, he and his entire family would have died. I'm not making that up. A famine was actually coming on this land. And it was going to be a famine of 7 years, that nothing was going to grow for 7 years. So during this time, it's when Joseph's going into slavery. He gets thrown in prison. And then he starts interpreting some dreams. God gives him a gift to interpret dreams of these prison guards. And these guys are like, oh my gosh. And so then they tell the Pharaoh. This is the king of Egypt, that this guy can interpret dreams. So then Joseph goes to Pharaoh and interprets some of his dreams. Long story short, the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh, makes Joseph the prime minister of Egypt. Joseph was the second in command in Egypt. God gave him a dream that said there's going to be a 7-year famine. But before that famine, there's going to be 7 years of plenty. And so Joseph said, okay, he tells the Pharaoh, in this 7 years of plenty, we're going to save up all of this grain because I know a 7-year famine's coming, and we're going to save enough grain to last those 7 years. So the Pharaoh says, do it. So he does it. And then basically all over this part of the world, everyone's starving. Everyone's dying because they didn't know a 7-year famine was coming. They're living it up during the 7 years of plenty. Famine comes. What do? And people started going to Egypt because they had heard that they had saved up enough food to last these years. So what happens is Joseph's brothers who sold him into slavery, they end up having to come to Egypt, not knowing what's happened to Joseph. Joseph's the prime minister. They end up coming before him, and they don't know it's him. And he has the choice whether or not to give them food or not. What does he do? He gives them food. He reveals himself to them that I'm your brother. I'm the one you sold into slavery. But what I want you to see is God was silent in this situation. Like you read this and God's not saying anything. It seems like God's absent, God's silent, but you've got to know that even if God seems silent in a situation, he is never absent from it. God seemed silent. What's going through Joseph's mind as all of this terrible suffering is happening to him? What's going through his head? God, where are you? My God, why have you forsaken me? But this secret, sovereign plan, God is always working for the ultimate good. Few things that we grab from this. Our sin cannot stop God's plan. I don't know if you noticed this, but it was this story that it was propelled into action and into Joseph eventually arising to power and saving his whole family. It was propelled into action by his sin, Jacob's sin, and the brother's sin. That's crazy. This story got going because of their sin. Your sin cannot stop God's plan. You're not that special. The good news is that God is so powerful and able that he works in and through and even uses the times we mess up royally. He works in it, rules over it, and uses it to work out for our redemption and for his glory. Your sin cannot thwart the plan of God. He uses it to get more glory, to bring you more joy in the end. Number 2, when it seems like God is killing you, it may actually be that he's saving you. You think it felt like Joseph was being killed by God? I think it did. Actually, Joseph comes out of this whole thing he has better character. He's humbled. He ends up saving his entire family. He's obviously changed because he uses his power and authority to save his family. If it would have been us, we may have just killed him. Or we may have made them serve back what they had put me through. It's like, yeah, you can get food if you become a slave. Joseph gave him grace. So when it seems like God is killing you, it may actually be that he's saving you. When it seems like your world is crashing down and things are falling apart, you need to know that sovereignty is not out the front windshield. It's in the rear view mirror. That's when you're going to see it. But you need to know that he may actually be saving you. He may actually be delivering you from a bigger problem. You know, the brothers want to get rid of Joseph because this big problem, our brother's a tool and our dad doesn't love us as much. That was their big problem. They had a bigger problem. A famine was coming and they're all going to die. That was the big problem that was coming. So we need to know that the things that we think are a problem or the things that are happening in our life, oh my gosh, it's crashing down. God may be using that to save us from deep idolatry in the heart. God may be using that suffering to free us and to make us more like Jesus. And though he may be silent in a situation, he's never absent. That's the secrecy of sovereignty. Third thing we see is the sweetness of salvation. If you get to the end of the book of Genesis, chapter 50, verse 20, Joseph's brothers apologize to him because they realize, oh my gosh, the prime minister that can give us food is our brother we betrayed. So they're apologizing, they're freaking out. And this is what Joseph says. If you got a Bible, you got to turn there. If you don't have this circled, you got to circle it. Got to tweet it, got to put it on Facebook, whatever you want to do. This is what Joseph says. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. You see what he's saying? It's like, you treated me horribly and you meant it for evil, but the sovereign God ruled over it and he meant it for good, that people would be saved. That's rear view mirror stuff. That's the end of the story stuff. Joseph didn't see that out the front. This is the promise. Like, this is the Old Testament verse of God causes all things to work together for good. And then the New Testament one that really keys on it's Romans 8:28, saying the same thing. What is meant for evil by others and by our enemy, God ends up using it and working in it for good, to redeem us. Joseph's entire family was sovereignly saved by God through a situation that seemed utterly dark and hopeless. That's how they were saved. Do you realize that this story happened again? This story of Joseph, it happened again. Because some years later, one greater than Joseph came. His name is Jesus. As we walk through the story of Joseph, just fresh in our mind, think about Jesus. Jesus left his father's home and went to a distant land called Dothan. You know what Dothan is where Jerusalem is? We read that story in Genesis 37, and we're like, they went to Shechem, and then there's a weird thing. This guy tells them they went to Dothan. They end up in Dothan. We read that, and we're like, why is that even in there? It's because Dothan is right where Jerusalem is today. So Joseph left a distant land, went to Jerusalem to his brothers, and his brothers received him not, just like Jesus. John 1 says he came to his own, but his own received him not. Jesus was betrayed by his own for pieces of silver. Jesus was falsely accused of sins he never committed. Though innocent, he was treated like a rebel. Jesus was crucified on a cross, the worst punishment that you could get, worldly speaking. But he was punished on the cross, not just physically, but spiritually, and he died for our sin in our place. Jesus wasn't just punished by man for things he didn't do. Jesus was punished by his Father for things that he didn't do, so that you and I could have forgiveness, so that we could have the blessing. Jesus was stripped of his robe. On the cross, Jesus didn't just lose the symbol of his Father's love. Jesus lost his Father's love. He cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Jesus was treated like a sinner so you could be treated like a saint. His robe was of righteousness. His robe of his Father's love, it was ripped off of him so that he could go and die, and he could put that robe on you so that you could be counted righteous as he is righteous, so that you could be forgiven of sin because he took off that robe and paid for it. Jesus was cast into a pit, abandoned to death. He was buried in a tomb. But he got out. 3 days later, Jesus, after dying, being buried, being wrapped and mummified in cloths, Jesus got out of the grave, conquering Satan, conquering sin, conquering death, and he arose to power. As Joseph rose and became the prime minister and used his power to save others, Jesus arose from death to life and uses his sovereignty to save us and deliver us. Jesus is the greater Joseph. Jesus is, he's the way that we know that God is sovereign, and that though things may be dark, the story's not over yet. You see, if God uses and works through the darkest event in the history of the world, the slaughter of the Son of God, if God works in that, through that, to bring out actually the greatest good in the history of the world, there's nothing he can't do. And there's nothing he won't do. The cross reveals to us that no matter how dark it seems in our life, if God is who he says he is, the story's not over, and this is going to turn out good. We know that he's committed to our good also because the cross ends up giving us the greatest good. Jesus, through the power of his cross, forgives us of our sin, and through the power of his resurrection, makes us alive, gives us a new identity, adopts us into his family, promises that he's going to come back here and make all things new. A couple things this means for you. Some of you have fallen into a pit of darkness, as it were. Whether it be depression, whether it be sin, whether it be hopelessness, whether you've lost a job, whether it's poverty, whether it's sickness. Some of you have fallen into that pit. Maybe you feel like you're in a pit right now. You feel like you're crying out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" If not you, somebody you know. And you need to hear this. Jesus has not forgotten you. Jesus has not forgotten you. I don't care how dark it seems. You need to know he's not forgotten you, and you need to know that he knows exactly how that feels. Jesus was cast into the pit of darkness. On the cross, Jesus absorbed the wrath of God. He took hell into his heart, for the analogy sake. Jesus knows what it feels like to be in darkness. Every sin you've ever committed, he took that on himself at one time. So you need to know that however dark it seems, he knows. He doesn't just say, I'll come and make it good all day. He says, I know how you feel. Have you been betrayed? He's been betrayed. Have you lost everything? He's lost everything. Have you been sick? Jesus took on all of our sickness. Are you dealing heavy with sin in your life that's destroying you? Jesus took on all of your sin and was destroyed by it. He knows. He's not forgotten you. If you watch all of The Lord of the Rings or you read it, at the end something happens where it's this little guy named Samwise Gamgee. And I'm going to call this the gospel according to Samwise Gamgee. He goes through the rest of the story, he and his buddy, they're trying to go destroy evil. They go through the rest of the story thinking this dude Gandalf just died and he was gone. Some of the other characters realize he came back and he works with them, but Sam and Frodo, they don't know what's going on, so they think Gandalf's dead. Then they end up defeating the enemy, and they're all coming back together. And after this really dark season, this trial, and it seemed like everything was hopeless, Sam sees Gandalf, realizes he's alive, and he says this, Gandalf, I thought you were dead, but then I thought I was dead myself. Is everything sad going to come untrue? What's happened to the world? Is everything sad going to come untrue? What's happened to the world? I know what's happened to our world. The greater Joseph has come. And he has sovereignly saved us by going through the utter darkness. And he's promised that he's going to come back here. And he's one day going to give you a new body. He's going to completely heal you of all harms. He's promised that he's working in and through everything to work it out for your joy and for his glory. He's going to wipe all tears from your eyes. Is everything sad going to come untrue? For the Christian, yeah, it really will. We don't get that. But look at what he went through on the cross. Look at the sovereign plan of God to bring out the salvation of Joseph's family and the salvation of the whole world for all those who trust Jesus. And you can look at that and say, no matter how dark it is, I trust him. I trust him. If you take these truths, if you realize sin is subtle and you need way more grace than you think, and you realize that sovereignty is secret, you don't know what's going on, but God is at work even if he seems silent. And if you know how sweet salvation is, that Jesus is going to come back by the power of his cross, by the power of his resurrection, for those who trust him, he's going to come back and perfect us. He's going to come back and perfect this world and make a new heavens and a new earth and come live with us forever. If you realize those things, if you look Jesus in the face, you'll be changed. You'll be freed from fear. You'll be freed from the worries that you have because you know that Jesus has got this. He's proved it to us. So I pray that you think about these things, and I pray that you look at the story of Joseph, you look at the story of Jesus, and know he knows how you feel, and he's not abandoned you. Jesus looks at you and says, in the world you will have tribulation. You will suffer. And he says, but take heart. I have overcome the world. Let's pray.